Hey guys, Zom Fox here, and today's time to do the 2023 USFL preview and predictions. Look, the playoffs have finally been set up. We know what four teams are playing, so I'm going to quickly review all four of the teams for you guys in case you've forgotten or want a refresher, or you just tuned back into the season. And then after that, we're going to go look at the predictions for how the playoffs are going to go. So without further ado, the four teams are the Panthers, Maulers, Stallions, and Breakers. So first team to look at is the Panthers. The Michigan Panthers ended up making the playoffs by winning their last game of the season. This team ended up in the last 8 games going 2-6, so a very poor record, but they won the most important game. This team is headlined by their two awesome defenders, Breland Speaks and Frank Gidna. Frank Gidna is going to be the defensive player of the year. I know some people say, there's a couple other guys. I know some people say Tizzino will win it. Some very few say Orr is going to win it. Gidna is the best defender in the league. His 104 tackles led the league. He had 4 defensive player of the weeks. Whereas Speaks, he himself had 2, which made them combined for 6. And Speaks led the league with 9 sacks during the year, which is insane. Now, the big flaw with the Panthers is that once you get rid of their 2 stars, they're a very poor team. Look, overall, they are statistically the worst team in the league, being outside the top 3 in literally every single category. And they made the playoffs by having a guy that they had literally signed 3 weeks ago in EJ Perry end up starting their Week 10 games. A bold decision by Mike Nolan, which did pay off. But the fact that that was the best way to go about winning a must-win game, very skeptical. Reggie Corbin has been a major disappointment this year. He had literally one game against the Stars because of that one moment. But aside from that, he's been a very bad running back for the most part this year. So this team is basically living and dying off their defense and special teams getting stuff done. So not the best team in the world, but they did make the dance and, any given Sunday. Then the team they will be facing is the division champion Maulers. Yep, the Maulers went from worst to first. The Maulers are headlined by, their defense with Tizzino and Reuben Foster with other guys. And then they have their offense, which is headlined by Troy Williams and their Generals-esque big three of himself, Madre London, and Garrett Groshek. The Maulers are very much a defensive, stalwart running team. They're much like, most Pittsburgh football teams, like the Steelers. Look, Tizzino was second in the league with 94 tackles. The team finished with the second best points allowed. They had the best turnover differential at +8, which is 5 better than second place. They had the best kickoff touchback percentage, which is a huge deal. With how the kickoffs work in the USFL, for those of you who don't know, kicking off, you are getting returned on nearly every time, and you're usually returning kicks to about the 40. So being able to kick a touchback to only put them at about 25 is a huge deal for you. So overall, it's a very big win that they're number one in that, and they're number one in punt return average. So they're winning special teams, defense, and turnover differential, which means that even though their offense has been very lackluster in yardage for a lot of ways, it doesn't matter because they're winning in every single margin that's important. T. Will has been a very awesome player at quarterback, much better than anyone they had last year. And whereas their big three, mainly the Madre London and Garrett Groshek, have been a bit disappointing this year, they usually have at least one of them have a solid game along with T. Will, which is a very good thing for them and why you would pick this team to win the whole thing. Then in terms of the South, we have the Breakers. Look, the Breakers are a very solid team, but they're also very inconsistent in a very weird way. MBT, McLeod Bethel Thompson, was first in passing yards, third in yards per attempt, third in TDs passing, third in passer rating, but was tied for fourth in interceptions. And West Hills was first in rushing yards, second in rushing TDs, second in rushing yards per game, but tied for second in most fumbles. So you see that both of them are really good in the counting stats, but then they also turn the ball over a lot. Whereas they did finish third with a +3 turnover differential. A lot of this is because they did have 17 takeaways, so they had a lot of takeaways, which shows that this team is very reliant on their defense getting takeaways because when their offense turns the ball over, it can be really bad for them. They are first in passing yards, and they are first in points allowed while also being second in yards per game. The big issues are that they don't have that single dominant edge rusher like Davin Bellamy last year. They have guys who can rush the edge, but they don't have that dominant type of guy, much like a Breland Speaks or an Adam Rodriguez. And the other thing is the fact that the last 3 weeks, West Hills has been bad. I mean, he's been even worse than how I made Reggie Corbin sound. West Hills has basically had an under 2.5 yards per carry across the last 3 weeks. And when you go back to 4 weeks ago, he had a solid game, but he hasn't had a really good game in a long time. He basically got the rushing yard title due to the fact that Mark Thompson didn't get to play every game, because if he had, he would have obliterated Hills. So, very questionable. This team had a huge start off when they were 3-0, but have fallen a lot since then. So, Very weird team, but then we have the number one team in the whole league, the Stallions. They won the South naturally, and they won the title for best regular season record. Alex Magoo is going to win MVP whenever that's announced. First in passing yards, first in completion percentage, first in passing yards per attempt, first in passing TDs, first in passer rating, and has a really good rushing season as well. Then Jay Sternberger is the highlight non-Magoo player. Fourth in receiving yards, second in yards per reception, and first in receiving TDs, while also being fourth in receiving yards per game as a tight end is insane. He basically took the mantle. Sage Surratt for a while looked to be the best tight end in the league, and then Sternberger just came up and said, "No, it is me." The Stallions also are number one in yards per game, punt net average, and third down percentage, while being basically like top four in every other stat. They're basically like the anti-Panthers, where instead of being the bottom or middle, they're the top or middle. And the big thing for them is that they're getting healthy at the right time. Scooby Wright looks to be able to play in the playoffs. Paling might be able to play this in the playoffs, I believe. And if they are, that's a couple huge impact guys on defense that'll help them out a lot. So overall, you look at the Stallions, they're a very, very solid team. CJ Mirabel has been awesome this year for them as a running back. He was kind of very under the radar early in the season because everyone thought, it was going to be Bo Scarborough. But then once he went down, Mirabel would take his place, and he did it very well. So those are the four teams that have made the playoffs. Now, in terms for the prediction. So, in terms of the prediction, we have the North Division with the Maulers versus the Panthers, and then we have the South Division, Stallions versus Breakers. The Stallions and Maulers are the teams that have home field advantage. The Maulers are playing at Canton, which naturally they've called Greater Pittsburgh, and the Stallions are playing at Birmingham. Now, in terms of the Maulers versus Panthers, this game is very intriguing because it is two teams that both basically play the same style. They rely heavily on special teams and defense. The big thing is the fact that the last two times these teams met, the Maulers did beat them. But that was a large part due to the Panthers turning the ball over a lot in both games. And last year we saw when they played for the chance to win the number one overall pick, the Panthers got the W by obliterating them. So overall, I think this is a huge question of how much do you really trust each of the big guys? Now, what it really means to me is, do I trust Mike Nolan's coaching ability? That decision of EJ Perry is a good one. The EJ Perry call was a huge risk, and it paid off against the Stars. And now he's going to have an extra week of film available for the Maulers. But at the same time, he's going to get another week to practice as well as getting that game time. I think the second half Panthers are the team we're going to see in the playoffs. Look, in the first half, they were getting beat. They were down 14. But in the second half came, their defense pitched a shutout against the really hot Case Cookus. And their offense scored enough points to get the lead and win the game. So I think the Panthers are riding that high, as well as the fact that I just think that Mike Nolan is a better coach than Ray Horton. I think they're both solid coaches, and they both really were really good this year. But I think Nolan is a better coach. I think that the Panthers' high-end talent can bail them out in this game a lot better than the Maulers. Essentially, I could see this being one of those games where it's going to be Gidna having an unbelievable game or Speaks having like a 3-sack game that ends up being the difference for these teams. So I'm going to go with the Panthers getting the W. Now, in terms of the Stallions versus the Breakers, this is a very, very interesting game. Because you see, if we have the Breakers team that has MBT playing insane 100 passer rating type of performance with 40 attempts, and West Hill's averaging 4.4 yards per carry, this will be a really close game. Or we could have the MBT that throws a couple interceptions and looks a lot like Kyle Sloter or the West Hills of the last few weeks, where he does literally nothing on offense and is a waste of a play. The only thing is, the Stallions don't do that. The Stallions are a much more consistent team. Magoo is the best quarterback in the league. They've got the best tight end in the league. They've got a really great kicker that's arguably the best in the league. And their defense is getting healthy. I think the Stallions win. I think this is just an easy call. I know a lot of you guys really would hope the Breakers win. But I think that all in all, this is one of those where if you're just saying if these teams played 10 times, probably 8 of them the Stallions win, maybe 7. Because about half the games you'll have either West Hills or MBT play like trash, which is a free win for the Stallions. And then in the games where they both play really well, the Stallions probably have a 50% chance to beat them. So all in all, I think they got like a 75% chance to beat the Breakers. So I'm going to pick the Stallions. That means the title game is the Michigan Panthers versus the Stallions. Two completely different teams. One team that is very, very, very well versed at basically everything, has an awesome offense, a defense that can get the job done, versus a team that has not really an offense and very reliant on a couple niche areas to win the game. I think that overall this will be a game that everyone will think will be a 20-point blowout, but will end up being a closer game than you think. But not one like the Stallions Stars last year, where it's a 3-point difference. I think this will end up being a 2-score game, but like a field goal and a touchdown, so a 9 to 11 point beating by the Stallions. I have the Stallions winning this game. I think the Stallions are just the best team in the league this year. I think that while the team isn't as dominant as they were last year, this team is better than last year. Essentially, this year's USFL, basically every single team had an upgrade of talent except for maybe the Generals. Every other team felt a lot better than last year and felt a lot more cohesive than any spring football team we've seen in recent memory by having the second season. And the Stallions are no different. I think that overall, Magoo's having a better year this year than Jamar did last year. While I think Maribel is having a great year, I do think that Scarborough at the end of the season was better last year. But that being said, I think Sternberger right now is doing better than even Victor Bolton Jr. was doing last year as a receiver, as well as I think that both defenses are playing solid. I just think the Stallions are the best team in the league right now, and they're going to go into the playoffs getting that repeat. So I have the Stallions winning. So that'll do it for my playoff preview and predictions. Let me know what your guys' predictions are down in the comments. I'll also have a post about that probably coming out later this week, probably about Friday. As always, if you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. It's a really huge help if you subscribe. Gets the video out there also with likes. And as always, have a great night.